Hello everyone, how are you guys doing? I hope that you're all doing well. In the previous recording, we focused on cost. We discussed in detail. I know the costs were a little bit complex, right? There are various different forms. So that particular recording was a little bit on the long side. So this time in this recording, we're going to focus on the revenues. And the good news is that compared to cost, revenues are much simpler. They're much more straightforward. So this is going to be a short video. All right, let's begin. So for revenues, we have three main concepts: total revenues, average revenues, and marginal revenues. Total revenues, well, this is a concept that you all know, but for the sake of clarity, let me just define it. It's basically the price that the firm is charging times quantity, where the quantity is sales volume. That's the total revenue. What about average revenue? Well, just like average cost, that basically means per unit revenue. So it's the total revenue of producing Q units, say 50 units, divided by 50. So that value, that object, is average revenue. Is the revenue you obtain per unit that you sell. Now the margin revenue, which is our key concept for profit maximization. Margin revenue, again similar to marginal cost, it is the additional revenue that you obtain from selling, in this case, from 1 unit of output. Formula is basically defined as, suppose that you're selling 10, right? It was 10 tons of aluminium, right? That was the example. So margin revenue of producing 1 more ton of aluminium when you're already selling 10 is basically the total revenue of selling 11 ton of aluminium minus total revenue of selling 10 aluminium. So that difference will give you the margin revenue of selling 1 more ton when you're already selling 10. Again, it depends on your initial position of Q, right? And it is the additional, the marginal unit on the next unit. Okay, again, to understand the relationship between average revenue and margin revenue, let's just think through a very simple example. Suppose that after finishing your degree, you decide to write a book, and you write a book titled My MBA Experience. And this book sold about 20,000 copies, which is pretty good, at the price of £20. So in this case, your total revenues will be 20K times 20, it's 400K. And your average revenue, because each of these books sells at the price of £20, your average revenue will be 20 as well. So now the question is, right, you sold 20K, but you feel like that's not really sufficient. You want to sell more. So the question for you is, if you wanted to sell more, right, how would your MR, margin revenue, compare to your current price, which is £20? Would it be higher, lower? Well, I should also add here actually a third option, which is, would it be the same? So the answer to that question will basically determine the relationship between AR and MR in your particular case. So I'm going to show you two cases which we observe in practice. Most of the cases that we observe in practice is the one on the left hand side. Well, this one I included here, but this is like a more special case, and I included here mostly for the sake of completeness. For in many markets, the margin revenue will be a function in this way, which is declining as quantity increases. The reason for this is, is simple. Going back to our book example, you already sold 20,000 copies, right? And you want to sell even more than what you could have sold at the price of 20. So if you want to be able to induce more sales, then generally you need to reduce the price. So basically you can sell the addition unit at a price that is lower than £20. Which basically means that your marginal revenue will be less than your average revenue, or which is the previous price of £20. Mathematically, this is basically represented as a downward sloping margin revenue curve. This basically tells us the marginal revenue that you could obtain from selling each additional unit of output will be declining as you want to try to increase your quantity level. If you try to sell even more and more books, you have to basically aggressively reduce the price. That's what it means. And in many markets, this is what we observe. Looking at the right hand side, so in this case, I have a margin revenue curve, as you can see, which is flat. This basically corresponds to the case in which I could sell my additional book without reducing the price at basically at £20. So when does that happen? When is it the case that firms can sell every additional unit of output at the current price without having to reduce the price aggressively, right? I mean, technically, if you think about it, this tells that you can sell as many items as you wish without having to ever reduce your price. As you can imagine, that ever hardly happens in practice. If you want to sell a lot, right, at some point you would have to reduce the price. Well, this is a special case that would only happen in kind of industries that is very competitive. In economics, when we say an industry is very competitive, we're describing an industry where there are many small firms, and each of them are producing a small amount. An example for this is like, say, potato producers, or you can think of any other fruits or vegetables. So these type of like agricultural products, they're very competitive in the sense that there are many firms. Their Herfindahl index is almost close to 0. And that's because there are many, say in the world, if you think about it, there are probably millions of potato producers. And each of them are contributing to the total aggregate production by a small amount. In these type of markets, you may find it surprising, but the margin revenue will look like a flat line, like the one on the right hand side. The reason for this is that because each individual producer is so small, given the overall size of the market, it doesn't really matter how much supply, how much the firm supplies to the market. It doesn't really have any price impact. In general, with some degree of concentration, the more the firm supplies to the market, it will depress the price. But in markets with many small producers, because each individual supplier is so insignificant that it doesn't matter how much supply it supplies to the market. This basically also means that the firm, the potato producer, can sell every additional unit of potato at the current market price without having any influence on it. Because of that, in these type of markets, we would observe, well, maybe not a perfectly flat, but a marginal revenue curve which will look fairly flat, close to this. Alright, so that's all I wanted to talk about revenues. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.